If you like Critical Pulse, then you're going to love always firing 2 arrows every time you reload. But there are 4 changes you may have to make in order to pull it off. So make sure you watch to the end so you don't miss any. Trust me when I say you'll be glad you did, is I got almost 30% extra DPS compared to my old Critical Pulse build. But first, let's cover what Critical Pulse does for those who don't know. Critical Pulse is a crossbow that triggers continuous power surge on hit. And let's stop for a second to see what power surge means. Power surge triggers a single instance of status damage equal to 50% of psi intensity, inflicting shock state on the enemy lasting 2 seconds. Power surge deals shock element. Additionally, it cannot deal critical damage, cannot deal bonus damage when hitting enemies' weak spots, and its damage won't be reduced by distance. Number 3, damage multiplier equals 50% 1 plus power surge damage bonus times 1 plus final power surge damage bonus. And they don't mention it here, but there is actually a debuff to accuracy that is a 40% accuracy debuff, which is huge and lasts for 6 seconds. And keeping in mind that this weapon deals AoE damage with the bolt of lightning that it can trigger, you're going to be applying this 40% accuracy debuff to a large group of enemies for 6 seconds. And you basically keep power surge up all the time on targets you're shooting at. You are triggering power surge on hit with a 70% chance to generate a deviated particle near the player, which you have to pick up and will enter you into a charged state. Continuous power surge can trigger every 0.5 seconds within 3 seconds on the current target. Higher stacks shorten the interim, so it'll shorten down to 0.26 seconds at the maximum stacks of 5 stacks. And this is a translation issue. It means deals 50% damage to other players, enemy players. While in a charged state, hitting a target consumes 1 charge to create an orb of lightning, dealing shock elemental status damage of 75% psi intensity to targets within 5 meters every 0.5 seconds. This damage benefits from power surge damage bonuses and has a 5% chance to generate deviated particles lasting for 3 seconds, and again, 50% less damage in PvP. For the weapons calibration, you're going to want to go with the portable style. The movement speed that this gives is huge and is going to really help with your survival. And really the only other option at the moment kind of gives you a bit of a debuff, so that's why we won't go with that. And of course, since this is an elemental build, you're going to want to go with double elemental substats on the calibration. So the first key change that I had to make, but you may not have to, is that I had to change my key armor to the Mayfly goggles. When I did my initial testing with the single arrow build, I found that the Mayfly goggles and the overloaded pants were pretty close, but the overloaded pants came out consistently ahead in DPS for me. And I think a lot of this has to do with overloaded pants' key feature, which is it has a chance to fire 6 arrows without reloading. However, if you are running a double arrow build, that feature is a lot less beneficial as you are already constantly shooting 2 arrows per reload. So this is why I feel like the Mayfly goggles really comes out ahead in a double arrow build. Its key feature is power surge trigger count +1 at the cost of power surge damage minus 30%. But that's going to be fully beneficial when you're shooting 2 arrows as opposed to overloaded pants, which gets cannibalized a little by constantly having 2 arrows. For your armor set, I recommend using the Treacherous Tides set to get weapon and status damage both, and that bonus increases as your health gets lower. That happens a lot on Lunar Oracle servers, which is where I'm currently playing. And that 4-set bonus of the shield really comes in clutch for survivability. Also, the Treacherous Tide set gives you that weapon and damage bonus, whereas if you were to use something like Blackstone, you're only getting the elemental status damage. elemental damage bonus. Now, if you're not constantly at low health due to sanity, then I would recommend using the 4-piece of the Blackstone. You're going to get more out of it, but just keeping in mind that if you can manage your sanity below the threshold here, which can be done pretty easily by eating certain foods. Spoiled food is a way I don't recommend doing it. You can do oranges, you can do cactus. There's a lot of, especially cactus is very easy to find. So this is pretty easy to manage even if you're not in a Lunar Oracle server and constantly having low health due to lunacy. So let's get into what'll probably be the biggest change to your Critical Pulse builds and mine, and that's to get the magazine capacity bonuses needed for double arrows on reloads. The easiest way that's going to be to do that is to use 1 piece of the Lone Wolf set, and you're going to have 1 free piece that you can use anyway, so this is a great way to get that magazine capacity. If you really want to go hard in the paint on damage and lose out on the 4-piece set of Treacherous Tides, the shield, you could do the 1 piece of Renegade to get reload speed, which is really nice for the build. But I can't really recommend that you use a 2-piece set of anything, especially Lone Wolf Pants. The crit rate really doesn't matter. So if you're going to do anything, I would maybe recommend the Renegade, or as I said earlier, 4-piece Treacherous Tides. But you'll also need to change out some of your mods in order to reach the magazine capacity bonus to get 2 arrows for reload. So make sure you stick around to the end of the mods so that you can figure out how that works. But one more thing to talk about before we get into that is our secondary and melee weapons. For the secondary, it doesn't matter too much what you pick. Anything that applies bullseye to the target is going to be great. I use the Bingo because I love being able to guarantee the bullseye will be marked on 1 shot after switching to the weapon. And for our melee, you could use the Kukri if you like to go and carry around the sticky ice and kill those before you start to do your damage. This really only great for stationary bosses where you're starting out damage. I personally prefer the Long Axe as it allows me to activate Fortress Warfare on a heavy attack for 10 seconds, and that will give you super armor as well as a damage bonus. So now let's get into the last 2 of the important changes that you may need to make to your builds. And the first of which is making sure that you have mods that have magazine capacity substats. This one isn't a good example, but I will show you later on ones I picked to give me that. So starting with the weapon mod, I chose Static Shock, and the Power Surge suffix is going to be preferable. This gives us Power Surge status duration minus 50%, but that's not going to really matter as long as you are doing continuous damage. You're going to be refreshing it. And it gives you an instant Power Surge damage bonus of 20%. For your secondary weapon, you're going to want Vulnerability Amplifier so that you can get Bullseye Vulnerability additional 8% damage. And the substats don't matter because you're not going to be holding it, and if you're not holding it, then it doesn't really do anything for you. Similarly, your melee weapon substats and the mods don't really matter. Final Territory might matter a little bit, as that might allow the Fortress Warfare buff to stay active for a little longer after you leave. For the helmet mod, I used Deviation Expert, and this is going to get us into the 4th key difference to the build that I had to make. And that is that I had originally been using Work of Proficiency to get extra reload speed and elemental damage bonuses on reloading. Because I was reloading after every shot, I was constantly getting that buff. But I think because the 2-arrow build means you reload less often, plus the fire rate actually matters when you have 2 arrows in a magazine. There's an actual magazine for you to fire and get a fire bonus from. I found that Deviation Expert came out ahead. Now, I'm going to also pause for a moment and specify how important it is that you test these mods for yourself, and how important it is that the substats may make the best in-slot mod not the best mod for you if you have a better substats on a different mod that's not necessarily considered meta. So I always recommend you do some testing on your own to find your best fit. Now you can see here I started using some magazine capacity, and if you've been watching along and you saw the original Power versus Surge build battle where I did all my testing with level 1 mods, you're going to notice I'm not doing that here because I had to get some leveled mods in order to get the magazine capacity I needed. But I tested the original build with level mods versus this build, and that's how I got my 30% damage increase, so I can kind of keep some consistency between that original tournament video and now. I'm also going to point out that I am not using lunar suffix mods for my helmet and my chest. It is possible that you can reach the magazine capacity threshold you need to without using magazine capacity bonuses on your helmet and chest. I don't know if lunar can give magazine capacity, so that's why I kind of had to stick with mods that would give me the mag capacity. But if you can meet the threshold, and make sure you stick around to the end where I'll tell you what that is, without having to use magazine capacity on your helmet and chest, then I would definitely recommend going for lunar mods on your helmet and chest, as they will scale so much more when you are at low health. And even at minimally reduced health, it already starts to stack up really fast. Next is the mask mod, but before we go into that, a moment for a shameless plug. If you are enjoying this video, please make sure to subscribe and share it with your friends. I'm a little itty bitty channel creator right now, and it really goes a long way in helping me grow and continue to make these videos. So, the mask mod that you're going to want to be using is Thunderclap, and preferably with the Power Surge substats. The two mods that can get that are the weapon and the mask, and you're going to get much better multipliers out of Power Surge mods, generally speaking, than you will out of anything else. Thunderclap causes, after triggering Power Surge 20 times, the next hit summons Celestial Thunder, which is shock damage of 200% psi intensity. For the chest, it doesn't matter too much what you pick, so long as it has good substats. You could go with one of the blue mods for some increased elemental damage, but you're unlikely to get magazine capacity from that, and you definitely need to get a certain threshold for this build, and the chest is a great place to get it if you can. If you do manage to get lunar and meet the threshold, then use a lunar suffix on your chest. I couldn't, so you can see here I am using some magazine capacity for the chest. For your pants, you have two options. I used Elemental Resonance for each instance of elemental damage dealt from the previous magazine. The next magazine gains elemental damage plus 1% for 15 seconds upon reloading, up to 24%. The other option that you have is Abnormal Increase, which can allow you to stack status damage up to 30%, but it does require a little bit more time to stack, so they're fairly comparable. It's ultimately going to come down to whatever is going to give you the better stats and what you test for higher damage. Again, for these though, I would go with talents if you can get them, as those are going to have the best substats for the build. For your gloves mod, you're going to have two options, and ultimately it's going to come down to balancing your elemental and status damage to be close together so that you can maximize the multiplicity of the buffs. The first option is going to be Elemental Overload. For both any mods here, I'm going to say talent substats. What Elemental Overload does is elemental damage, which includes our shock damage plus 18%. Your other option would be to go with a status enhancement, and if you can find one with talents, that's going to be the best bet, which that just gives you a flat status damage plus 20%. I was coming in a little high on status damage, so I went with the elemental damage for the mod. For your shoes mod, the best bet is going to be Rush Hour Talent Suffix if you are playing at consistently low health, i.e. the Lunar Oracle servers, even at just half health, which is pretty common due to lunacy, even if you're using the Treacherous Tides to reduce the loss from sanity, you're going to be capping out more than other options. And it has the best ceiling at plus 36% weapon and status damage. By this point, you're probably wondering, would you just get to how much magazine capacity is required in order to make this work? Well, I found that when I exceeded 60% additional mag capacity, I got from my armor 10%, so I got another 50 from my mods, so 60% in total. I was finally able to get 2 arrows per reload, and so that is the threshold that I'm going with. Feel free to correct me in the comments if you manage to get it working at a lower threshold. For our Deviant, we are going to go with Mini Feaster, as it will allow us to increase our status damage up to 80% if you have a level 5 version. For our ammo, we can now go with the new Suppression AP arrow, which costs Stardust Ingots, gives you 25% damage against Deviants and 30% against their shields. Additionally, plus 15% per shot, plus the standard plus 15% psi intensity that you used to get from the old blasting type. You can still use, but this is definitely substantially better. If you are instead fighting against humanoids, you can go with the Penetration AP, which costs control units and basically gives you the same effects against humanoids. For your food, you can go with the Mixed Fried Hot Dog for increased damage by 20%, as you will be marking targets with the bullseye. And for your drink, you can go with the Stardust Raspberry Shaved Ice, as this will increase the continuous debuff effect of both your bullseye and power surge by 20%. The cradle that I'm using for this season is on screen now, and I will post it in the comments so that I am able to update it in different seasons. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you like it, and please check out the original build comparison video I did with Burn vs. Surge on screen now. Thanks so much.